Record. All right, so this will be recorded and it will be uploaded later just to share for educational purposes. I will stop it at the end if you have questions and answers, questions that you want to ask, but you don't want to be recorded. So I will stop it at the end of the talk. So again, like I said, I'm really excited that everyone's here today for the start of this series, From Open Education to Epistemic and Social Justice. And the first talk in the series that we have will be delivered by Apurva Ashok. So I'm really excited about that. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that UBC's Vancouver Point Grey campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of this land. And with this land acknowledgement, I also hope that the focus of this series on social and epistemic justice provides ways that as educators, we can redress epistemic and social injustice by identifying how our educational systems privilege dominant epistemologies and pedagogies while disadvantaging and challenging the testimonial credibility of others. So I hope that feeds into when we're thinking about Indigenous knowledge. What do we know? What do we not? What knowledge has and has not been privileged? So please do keep that in mind as we have this series and with today's talk and the upcoming talk. So today we have Apurva joining us. And then we have two more talks in this series, sorry. On March 28th, we have Jasmine Robert Cruz joining us for social justice applications of open pedagogy. And then on April 3rd, we have Sakina Walji, who will be talking about reimagining assessments for social and epistemic justice through the lens of open pedagogy. So again, this is a series. And as a part of the current David Lamb Chair in Multicultural Education, it's my hope that through this talk and my chair that we can help develop scholarship of teaching and learning research, open educational practices, and materials that are by and for the benefit and empowerment of non-privileged learners who may be underrepresented in educational systems or marginalized in their global context. So I'll put this out to you now, and I'll put it to you again at the end. If this is something that you're interested in, please do connect with me as part of this chair. I would like to help support projects that are looking at epistemic and social justice to see how I can support you. And I also hope to launch a public scholarship website where we can put some of the resources that have been created on there as well. All right, without further ado, I'm honored to have Apurva Ashok with us today to start off this series with her talk on the possibility of new futures, dreaming with open education, and just a little bit about Apurva. Apurva Ashok is a project lead at Rebus Community, a Canadian charity that supports open publishing. She runs a textbook success program, a year-long professional development course for OER creators. Apurva works with librarians, faculties, and administrators to guide them through best practices for open publishing and to grow their capacity for open textbook creation. And to this end, Apurva has co-authored the Rebus Guide to Publishing Open Textbooks so far as a way to publicly share a flexible methodology for publishing open books. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Apurva take us away.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sarita. And as Donna said in the chat, it sounds like it's going to be an amazing series. So you will definitely catch me at Jasmine and Sakina's talks in the coming weeks. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to be here today. As Sarita said, my name is Apurva Ashok, and today we're talking about new futures and possibilities in open education. As a reminder, this talk is going to be recorded, so if you need to step away at any point, feel free to do that. We'll share this with you afterwards. You can always catch up. If you need access to a transcript or the captions, you should be able to access that via Zoom. So just hover over to the settings and make sure that you can adjust your preferences however you need. And a final note, all of the slides and any collective sort of note-taking that we do today will be saved and shared with you all afterwards. So please don't feel pressured to take notes, but really try to be present and do a little bit of reflecting and dreaming with me today. And just so you have an overview of what to expect for the next hour or so, um, we'll start with some introductions. I'd love to learn more about who's in the room here. I also have a bit of a grounding provocation to prime us really in this space of reflection. I'll also try to set the context by defining some key terms. Again, as I said, learn about who is here today. We are a pretty intimate group, so I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to connect with one another. I'm hoping that our conversation will really focus on open practices and values as we unpack how open, in particular, can enhance education. I have a few closing remarks and a little bit of a group activity that I would love for us to participate in, and then I'll pass it over to everybody here for reflections and questions and comments. And as I mentioned to Sarita, I really hope that you all feel hopeful and inspired during the next hour. Those are some of the emotions that I'm hoping you will resonate with as you leave the Zoom room later today. To get us started, I also want to take a moment to reflect on where I'm joining from, and I would encourage you all to do the same, to just situate ourselves in this conversation. I am an immigrant settler from India. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and today I'm joining you all from Toronto. You might know that as Toronto. Uh, I'm situated on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the First Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And I'm really grateful for the privilege to live, play, work, and learn here. As Surita noted as well, this territorial or land acknowledgement is just one step in my own commitment to reconciliation and decolonization. I hope for some of you, it can serve as a helpful starting point for all of you to learn a little bit more about the history of the lands and the indigenous peoples in your regions, to learn more maybe about where your schools or universities are located, or just to rethink how you can continue to orient your work in service of local communities. There are a few resources on this slide that I think can support your work in creating change. So I would really encourage you all to spend a moment after this conversation to visit some of these sites and resources. As Sarita said, I work for the Rebus Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization and Canadian registered charity that focuses on education. Simply put, we offer publisher support and professional development for collaborative open education projects. Our work at Rebus is entirely mission driven, and our goals are to center the student experience and learning throughout the publishing process, throughout our programming, and in any materials or outputs that our community members or collaborators produce. Really what we're hoping to do is to grow a movement, grow the open movement by building a field of inclusive leaders who are using OER in very transformative ways. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of different stakeholders in the post-secondary space, including colleges, institutions, consortiums, boards of education, or even individual educators. And some of you are in this room today, and thank you so much for being here and for letting me learn from you. Rebus and we've supported several OER creation and adaptation projects in a number of different regions and disciplines. So I've had the opportunity to look at emerging themes and patterns, which we've documented in the form of several free resources, and I'll be sharing those with you today so you can save and bookmark them and return to them as you need. But I'm also going to try to highlight some lessons learned through those processes, through those interactions, through those relationships, and we'll share them with you. And I'm curious for those of you who might be working in the primary education space or outside of post-secondary, whether these themes resonate and whether these themes connect with you. And actually, I want to start us off with a little bit of a grounding quote or provocation. I want to start us with a quote from Robin Kelly, who is a historian and academic. And this has been a quote that's been resonating with me a lot recently. Robin says, "The map to a new world is in our imagination." And I just want this group to maybe pause and maybe take a few deep breaths and just sit with this quote. The map to a new world is in our imagination. Ruha Benjamin, who is a professor of African American Studies and an author and innovator, uses that word imagination pretty interchangeably with the idea of dreams and dreaming, ideologies and ideas, and really implies this idea not only of an individual imagination and therefore an individual map, but rather a collective imagination. Ruha says, when we imagine different worlds together, when we write shared stories together, when we plot futures together, we all flourish. So, really, I want you to consider this talk, but also this series as an opportunity for you and an invitation for you all to imagine and to dream and to sit in possibility. So, please take this space and be expansive and let your mind wander as far and wide as it would like to. And as I said, today we're going to start with just unpacking some terms. And in particular, we're trying to unpack the promise of education and what it can do. UNESCO, I find, has a fairly expansive definition of education, which I like to come back to, and you see on the slide here. They define education as the process of facilitating learning or the acquisition of knowledge, skills, values, beliefs, and habits. UNESCO also goes on to define a quality education as one that focuses on appropriate skill development, on gender parity, on educational materials and resources, as well as access via scholarships, which you see in this definition, and practices via that mention of teaching force at the end of this definition. And I'm just going to pause, let you all read and hold on to this definition in mind, because we're going to slowly start jotting down our own perspectives in a moment. So education is the process of facilitating learning or the acquisition of knowledges, skills, values, beliefs, and habits. I'm going to get us to start imagining collectively, the 17 of us in this room. I'm going to drop in a link to a shared note-taking space via Mentimeter. For those of you who have access to a computer or a phone, you can scan the QR code that you see on the screen, or you can go to mentimeter.com and type in the code 75545295 that you see on the screen. If anyone has any trouble accessing this tool, please let me know. And if you're in a position where you cannot access the tool, but you can access the Zoom chat, I'm going to be reading out the prompts that you'll see in this tool, and I would really encourage you to share your answers via the Zoom chat. And if you are in there already, you're probably seeing a first prompt come up, which is, given this definition of education as that process of facilitating learning or the acquisition of knowledge, skills, values, beliefs, habits, where do you think education happens? What are the spaces that you see facilitating learning? And again, hold on to that grounding provocation and really be as expansive as you can as you drop in your responses. I'll give us a few minutes to do this, so please don't feel rushed. This is lovely. So there's a big one here that people are latching on to, which I'm not surprised by, which is everywhere. But folks are also flagging that education happens in the workspace, in the home, in community. internally. So there's also self-reflection there. There's education in nature, in spaces where we are challenged, in school and in life. I'll pause in case there are a few more responses. And I know there are some people who are just hopping on, so I might drop in the link again for anyone who's just joining the call. We're just answering this initial prompt. What are the spaces where education happens? And I like this word cloud because it really is one of those tools that shows you, again, where there's commonality in our answers and where there's difference. So everywhere is really something that folks have latched onto. In the classroom, which is a space that you might have expect to crop up bigger and larger and louder in all of our responses, it's actually quite hidden. Now that you've thought a little bit about where education happens, I'd love for you to also think about what a quality education enables. So if I were to post you a question and say, when someone has access to a quality education, so this is one where there's attention that's being paid to things like access to modes of teaching, to gender parity, what impact or effect does this have? What impact or effect could it have? What does it enable? This is really more of an open-ended question, so you can be as expansive as and wordy as you would like to in your responses. We have folks saying empowerment, self-determination, humility, agency, risk-taking, reflection, self-esteem, opportunities, opens up possibilities, progress, personal growth. Yeah. Courage and reflection. If I had to pull up myself, I would say, establishing, or it enables citizenship literacy. Self-acceptance. Education allows us and enables us to make change in community, to better articulate beliefs, to just progress, perhaps as individuals and as a community. To see others' viewpoints. It enables choice and agency. These are lovely responses, so thank you. If you have more thoughts and you want to keep adding to this collective space, feel free to do that. For now, I might also just ask us to answer one final question for now, to really just articulate our professional roles. What are we identifying with? Just to get a sense of who's in the room and whose voices and perspectives are informing this particular future or this particular vision that we're discussing. And I know that we all have various intersectional identities. So I'm really asking us to think about our professional roles, because I think everything else that we are and the ways in which we show up regardless of the roles or titles we hold. The future that's created solely by instructors or teachers might not look the same as ones that administrators or technologists who don't seem to be in the room today are creating. And I will say, if you're someone who is something else in the professional education system, drop that into the chat. We want to know who you are and what roles you find yourselves occupying. So I'll give you a moment to type that into the chat. For the most part, it looks like we're a mix of instructors, students, librarian, instructional designers, and technologists, and two mystery individuals who will hopefully tell us what they do in the chat. But I think this is really helpful as we continue to imagine and dream today, because we are missing administrator voices, or we know that student and instructor voices may be a little louder today. And Shauna, great, you're helping us with that admin perspective when you share your perspectives. And Susan, I'll drop in a link to the poll again. I think it's just click all that apply, click all that resonate with you. So hopefully you can drop in your role as well. And I will just say, please keep this space open. There's one more question in this little setup that I have that we're going to come back to at the very end of this conversation. So if you can keep this tab open as we go through the rest of the conversation, that'll be great. And I want to bring us back to our context setting. So we've talked about education and what a quality education is. I wanted to offer very quickly some shared definitions for other phrases that we'll be using, namely OER. So OER stands for Open Educational Resources. And these are teaching and learning materials with an open license that enable easy use. And as you can see, there are a few different elements of this definition that I want to flag as important. OER are typically free, but they can also be available to students at a low cost. And their main distinguishing factor is their license, their ability to be revised, reused, remixed, redistributed, and retained, which in the open education world are commonly referred to as the 5 Rs. An important note is that OER are copyrightable resources that are published typically with a Creative Commons license, but as this definition suggests, they might sometimes be released and reside in the public domain. And you'll see a few examples of this as we go on today. I also want to take a moment to clarify that when I talk about OER, I don't just mean digital textbooks that you see on the left here or print textbooks. OER really encompasses all kinds of teaching and learning materials. So on this slide, you'll see all of the materials you see here are OER or help produce OER. So you have a collection of case studies and guides. You have quizzes and supplementary materials like this slide deck on the left here. You have images that are in the public domain, like this bust of Socrates, other interactive simulations, videos that you might find, or audio files as well, and podcasts. So OER really is not just a textbook, but it can be so many other things besides just text. And when you think of open, I would also encourage you to think beyond just the materials and just the outputs and the licenses. Really, the question I'm going to ask us to be considering deeply is, what would it mean to be an open practitioner? Métis librarian Kayla Larson coined these 6 Rs that you see on this slide here for Indigenous OERs to really provide an Indigenous-focused framework for incorporating Indigenous knowledge into openly licensed teaching and learning materials. So the 6 Rs you see on the screen are respect, relationships, responsibility, reverence, relevance, reciprocity. The more time I actually sit with this framework, the more I'm reminded how these 6 Rs initially proposed to work with Indigenous knowledge as we're creating OER really capture the philosophy and culture and spirit of working in the open. I think there is a tendency for us working in the open sometimes to look at things at the surface level and look at things in terms of its openness, specifically around license or format. But with these 6 Rs and thinking of them really as core values for open practice, I find myself asking, what would it mean to move beyond using OER to really practicing in the open? And this is where I come back to this idea of open pedagogy, which some people refer to as open educational practices, so practicing open education. If you start thinking about openness as how you teach rather than just what you teach, I think a whole world of possibility opens up. And some of these definitions, it was very hard for me to pick just one, so I settled on picking 3. Some of the definitions on the screen here suggest how open pedagogy is a way to fold that knowledge consumption piece and knowledge creation piece into each. It's really a different philosophy of learning. It's not a terminal process, a goal-oriented or outcome-oriented one, but it really is something that is iterative and recursive, one that's empowering learners through the agency to create as they learn, perhaps a process that is reaffirming a learner's place in the commons, but also one that is allowing them to actively shape the world in the process of learning. And I really like how we can draw on Kayla's 6 Rs to think about how we show up when we teach. We can think about the relationship between the learner and the instructor, the responsibility and respect that we have to each other and to ourselves. The reverence that we have for the process of learning and the process of education as this way to facilitate learning, but also the reciprocity in the exchange of learning. And I really want us to continue to keep weaving these concepts together. So when we're talking about education, as so many of you noted in that collective note-taking space, we're not just talking about teaching and learning in the classroom. Rather, we're talking about a public service and a social justice endeavor. We're talking about the places that people come to find themselves represented, to find themselves respected. We are talking about spaces where people are constructing identities of the self. Fundamentally, we are part and parcel of an industry that shapes critical thinking, that shapes people's identities. For all of us as educators, regardless of those professional roles in which we occupy, I think we see students coming into schools, to colleges, to see themselves in the learning materials they consume so they can envision and imagine a world in which they belong and that they can fully participate in as active and engaged situation. And I think that's the kicker, the power that we hold as educators and the power that education has in shaping one's self-view is immense. So to think that the ways in which we teach or the types of materials that we're teaching with could potentially limit someone's view of self should make us pause and should give us pause and make us work to find an alternative. I think it's also worth noting that education in particular has been a means by which communities who have been historically stripped of power can find other ways to be empowered, to share their own stories and histories and knowledges in the ways that they deem appropriate and to the peoples that they deem safe to share with. So I'm going to ask us to maybe think about looking at existing knowledge and research and practice, not just with this tendency to do what we're told, but with some curiosity around new discoveries, curiosity around the potential of OER and open practice, curiosity through debate and dialogue with each other as lifelong learners. And I really think if that philosophy of open, using the 6 R's, thinking about open pedagogy, open educational practice, thinking about education as this process of facilitating learning, is really meaningfully modeled in who we are as educators, but it's also reflected in us as people. It can inform these systems of education that we're participating in and could radically transform them. And like I said, for me, I'm coming from a space that focuses mainly on the publishing piece. So if I can give you a few examples here, and when I think about open publishing in particular, and about it as a process to write new futures, we ask the folks we work with to think about the publishing cycle. We ask teams of creators to always think about ways in which their OER materials can be more inclusive, but also the outcomes that they're the types of courses and the materials and the ways in which they're teaching them really foster student success, and a very expansive definition of what success really is beyond just grades. As you're seeing from this particular cycle, there's different kinds of primers and questions and prompts that we ask teams to think about. Ask them to think about how their content and practices will foster equitable student learning, who is authoring or teaching with that material in the first place, or to think about what they want the resource to achieve. So it's not just publishing for the sake of or using OER for the sake of, but it really is thinking about that impact and that piece around what does this enable? What does this allow? How can this help someone push past a limitation? This process and that philosophy is documented in the guide to publishing open textbooks, but it's also the basis of a lot of our programming or webinars or workshops that you might come across. And as we've been discussing today, I think open is about more than just publishing content. So I wanted to share with you all a few more examples. And as I said, I'm happy to share these with you in the chat and afterwards as well, so you can bookmark them and save them in your spaces. These are some examples of resources from Rebus that can hopefully help you move beyond just creating a guide, but also help you engage with other people as part of your open journey, whatever that might be for you. In these OER, you'll find suggestions, for instance, with the one on the left here, a guide to making open textbooks with students. You'll find suggestions for different ways to engage with students in your schools or on your campus through open pedagogy. Making Ripples, a guidebook to challenging status quo in OER creation, will help you reflect on your role in education to transform your pedagogical practices, perhaps by incorporating equitable methods and interactions into your teaching and learning. It's also a guide that can help you embrace the messiness and the complexity of practicing open, and in ways that really help you show up with honesty and humility and courage. And those are things that don't come very easily, but are really emotions that we find ourselves stumbling across throughout this journey. And this guide in particular is really designed for educators and people in different roles, and for people who are thinking about education at all of those levels and spaces that you all flagged earlier today. Beyond the Horizon will hopefully broaden your understanding of OER efficacy and help you think more about reporting frameworks and the impact of your work. And I will just say, all of these resources offer small ways for you to tap into what I'm calling open practice, but also offer small ways for you to center your own growth as individuals and to center student success as well. And I will say there is an abundance of resources to share, but I want to make sure that we have space and time for questions and comments. I'm going to slowly start to close us out. And one way I love to do that is by just drawing on other people. And I wanted to quote Alicia Elliott, who is a Haudenosaunee author. Alicia says, not only is another world possible, we've had other worlds in the past. The notion that we can't make massive changes because the world has always been this way is absolutely designed to grind us into submission and acceptance. So I'm going to ask us to imagine new worlds together, to work together to co-create those new futures. And I'm going to turn us back to Mentimeter momentarily so you can participate in one final prompt. So for those of you who need access to that, just let me know and I'll pop that into the chat. I really want us to walk away, as I said, from this conversation with a hopeful message, with some kind of dream statement for the future. A message that maybe reminds you of your vision for the future, or reminds you about the purpose of education or your specific role within it. This could be a phrase, this could be a quote, this could be a link to a song that you love, a description of a better world if you're more of a painter and you'd like to really describe this future that we're stepping in towards. Something that you might want to turn to, not only in tougher times, but also in joyful ones, as a reminder that those better worlds are possible. That you, by virtue of the work you do, you're already on the path towards that better world, that reality is within reach. And I will just say, take your time. I'm going to maybe give us about 5 minutes or so to really sit with this and use this as a collective space, as a way for all of us to come back and find inspiration and imagination together. And if anyone has trouble with the Mentimeter tool, please let me know. These are wonderful. Please keep them coming. I'll give you a few more minutes. Again, for anyone who's still just wondering, prompt is to drop in a hopeful message, something that can remind you of your vision for the future or the purpose of education or your role in it. It could be as simple as a phrase, a quote, a longer description, anything you might find yourself wanting to turn back to in joyful moments, in tougher times. I'll give it maybe another minute and I'll start reading some of these out so we can also lift each other up in the process. Okay, so some of these dream statements that folks have conjured up and imagined today: accessible education for everyone, open possibilities, inclusive education, belonging, growth, equitable access to information, anti-capitalist structures of learning and knowledge sharing, to follow personal interests or passions, to challenge ideas or the status quo, and to ignite new ways of knowing and being. I think my role is to help unlock and nurture my students' gifts, talents, and passions. To help my students become resilient and independent, and to encourage their creative and critical thinking so they are prepared for an unknown future. These are all beautiful and making me smile. Another final set of dream statements for folks. Everyone is safe to learn and grow as much as they want. Education is a joyful and playful process of inquiry that creates connections and inspires previously unimagined possibilities. And lastly, I want to design, create, and teach with the intention of centering equity and creativity and grace for my own learning through the process. Thank you all. These are beautiful. And these are definitely things that I'm going to come back to if I just want to start my day off right. As I mentioned at the start, I will be sharing all of these responses with you afterwards, so you can print them out, put them right by your uh, desk, or in a journal somewhere that you find yourselves coming back to. And I will also just say, over the next few days or weeks, just consider how thinking about open in this way can maybe shift your notion of what education can do, or how these statements can prompt you to think about what the limits of education are. Where do they begin? Where do they end? How far into the future can you see? Where do you want to go, and who do you want to connect to, and how are you keeping that hope alive? There's a number of you in this room today, and there might be opportunity to continue connecting with each other, not just in the next two conversations over the coming weeks, but beyond that. And I really hope that today's conversation with each other has helped reiterate just that importance of the role of education and the power we all hold as educators. I think I'm really struck by the statements that you've put together at the end, but also by the responses you had to that first prompt of where you see education showing up in relationships, in classrooms, in the workspace, um, in reflection. I think if we're holding on to that sense of what education is and that immense power that we all have, there's an opportunity there for us to transform the status quo and to inform both current and future scholars and citizens in the world. I think open can be a helpful strategy to advocate for and perform some of these equitable practices in our schools and institutions and communities. So by adopting OER, by creating OER with students, by thinking about different kinds of maybe pedagogical practices or tools to bring in to these spaces. And I really hope that with some of the examples that you've seen, you're thinking about how OER content can be both representative, accessible, but also created by comprehensive teams in very equitable ways. I also hope that the values that these learning materials espouse or the pedagogy with which we teach is weighed with equal importance, because both of those things can really inform our journey towards that brighter future. So thank you all, as Donna and others have said in the chat. This has been very inspirational and re-energizing for me. Before I pass it on to you, I have one more thing to do, and that is to just give a lot of thanks and gratitude to the other people on whom these ideas were built. There were a lot of other people who said beautiful words and gave me the space and the opportunity to dream. So everyone who has been cited in this presentation so far, thank you to you, but also to Sarita for putting this all together in your capacity with this particular chair. To Caitlin, who is on my staff. We're a small team of 2 people, plus a whole bunch of other community members who are trying to do a lot. Caitlin, Amanda, Hugh, Boris, our facilitators and participants, Josie, who is on this call, and BC Campus, who is doing wonderful work, Angela DeBarger, Carrie Diaz-Eaton, and Tara Robertson, as well as many other people who have inspired just this way of thinking and the freedom to dream and imagine. So thank you to them. Thank you to all of you for being here today and dreaming with me. And with that, I will pass it on to you to maybe ask some questions or share some reflections and comments.
Thank you. And I will also stop the recording. So if you want to, so you're free to ask your questions and don't worry about it being recorded. So let me do that.